Good afternoon and happy Sunday, you guys. I am so glad to be here, and I'm so glad that you are too. And I'm Sarah, for those of you that might not know me as well. And this morning, afternoon, midday, I wanted to share with you a little bit. I saw a movie last night called She Said. Feel free to pop it into the comments and let me know if you've seen it or if you want to see it. Sometimes I go into those movies and I'm like not sure if I want to see it, right? Because I know myself, I am going to get very invested in the movie. Anytime it's a movie about people's rights or people being treated fairly, I have triggers around those two topics. So I know that I'm going to get very invested and have a lot of thoughts going, we'll say, after the movie. And of course, that is exactly what happened. And it was really good because one of the things that I think a lot about and have thought a lot about is talking specifically about the movie is how does this come to be where a group of people, in this case women, fall victim to circumstances, fall victim to the behaviors of others. And from a big picture scale, it can appear as if, it can appear to some people, I think, as if this just happens, or it can appear as if there's something wrong with the women that were involved. There's all kinds of ways that people end up looking at those scenarios. And I love looking at it to really develop a greater level of understanding, because I know that anytime a whole group of people is falling, I don't even like the word falling, but is finding themselves in situations where they really don't want to be, then I know there's like a whole bigger thing at work, right? And so as I was asking myself last night, again, this question, because I have seen multiple movies like this, whether it has to do with race, gender, various different forms of equality, or big corporation things, dealing with poor water, right? There's all different kinds of these movies that show you what's going on in the world. And so as I was thinking on it last night, how is it in this particular case that these very successful, high-achieving, intelligent, capable women ended up in these very sexually compromising, between just sexually compromising right up to rape scenarios? And so as I started thinking about that more and more, based in the work that I do with people, I come back to it has to do, right? The only answer I can come up with is that it has to do with what people believe, right? So it's two ways I think about it. It's what the individual is believing, and then also sort of this collective thinking, right? Or the majority thinking. And so as I was watching this movie, one of the lines that really stood out to me was this quote. And so the movie is going back and forth, and the women are telling their stories and really cultivating this deeper level of understanding for these investigative reporters of how this huge thing with Harry Weinstein ended up happening, and the multiple levels at which people were complicit in keeping this dynamic going, right? And so one of the ways that people refer to that, right, it's like systemic racism or systemic sexism, and or institutional sexism, racism. So just that big, much bigger network, right? You've got the individual person, but then you've got all of these other layers all the way out to be able to keep that kind of thing going. And not just like in that one circumstance, right, at Miramax, but like big picture, like the whole world, right? And the way that, in this case, I'm just looking at this one sliver, right, of how women are treated, and how women present themselves. So there's a 1,000 different directions that I could go with this and want to go with this, but I'm going to stick to one sliver for the sake of time and just understanding, right? So there's this one quote, and it's towards halfway through the movie, and one of the reporters is interviewing one of the women, again, very capable, intelligent women. And these women that she was really, that they were interviewing at the time were in their early 20s. So I also like went back in time, right? And thinking about myself now at 45, back when I was in my early 20s. And being able to so relate to some of the thought processes that were being discussed in this movie, and thinking about my own experiences as a young girl and the various things that I was taught and or that I simply learned through watching other women around me, through watching women on TV, that I then came to believe about myself. Most of this is unconscious. It's not like I sat there and thought like, oh yeah, women are seen as less than men, right? I didn't sit there and think that, and no one actually said that to me. But when you're in this big world, right, this big system that is way bigger than just yourself, and ultimately it's culture, right? The way that culture develops, you slowly over time begin to make these beliefs about who you are, about your personal identity, and about your identity as a woman, about your identity as a man. And so it goes from there, right? Your identity as a wife, as a husband, as a son, as a daughter, all the pieces. So looking at this one quote, because this is really just stuck out to me a lot, the investigative reporter asked the woman, well, based on all of your experiences in your early 20s, and now here you are in your 50s, how do you think about it now? How do you like reflect back on that incident happening to you in your early 20s? And she says, in a way, I feel that incident dictated my entire life. Right? And then she goes on to like describe, she's like, it wasn't overt. It wasn't something I was consciously aware of, that it had a layer, a web, an infiltration into the rest of her life up till 50, right? So you think about it, it's like 30 years that it had impacted, right? I think about it like that, like it sort of webbed its way through her entire life. And that was like one incident or multiple incidences during a year, essentially, that happened for her. And so I just really like sat with that and really thought into that some more. And it's so profound to have that awareness and looking back on your life and thinking, yeah, wow, I can see that now at 50, how that particular circumstance within a year time frame had an impact on me for the rest of my life, right? And so big picture, as you're thinking about who you are and how you show up in the world and how you desire to show up in the world, and more importantly, like the things that you desire to have in your life, right? A meaningful job, meaningful relationships, deep romantic love, the ability to create money, the ability to create more money when you want it, right? The ability to have a great job that you actually make money from, right? I mean, all of those things are things that in general, I hear a lot of stories from people and have held a lot of stories myself about how those things are really hard to come by, or the path to getting them is a path that is very hard. So being able to understand what I want to offer to you today is changing this, right? Starts with being able to understand how you came to be who you are right now. How you show up in the world and how it is impacting you. And when you know how life works, you don't have to look back, right, at 50 or 60 or 70 and consider, wow, that thing like dictated my whole life. That thing infiltrated all of my decisions. Instead, you actually now can change things. And more importantly, as you move into your future, there is a better way. There is a new way, right? There was the opportunity, had she known that she could do this, which she didn't at the time, but to be able to handle situations that come up in life today such that you won't look back at 70 and be like, man, that thing affected my life negatively in the last 20 or 30 years. So when we're thinking about the way in which you show up now in the world, when you have an understanding of how you got to be here, right, then you can actually change it, which is incredibly exciting and powerful, because most of us got taught that life just happens to us, right? That we're virtually powerless over the circumstances that we find ourselves in, which is not true. That is a lie. We actually have a lot of control about the circumstances that we are in. And we, even more exciting, have the power to create the circumstances we desire to be in. Ooh, getting worked up here, getting excited. Okay, so when you understand how you got to where you are, then you can actually start to understand who you want to be, who you were meant to be, and who you desire to be. Okay, and I would say you really can't become something new without having an understanding of how you got here, why you're here. You don't need to go over the nitty-gritty details. You know, when I was a therapist, my 20 years of working as a therapist, I did a lot of reviewing the past and a lot of going into detail about how people got to be here and reviewing various circumstances from their childhood, with the idea being that it would be working to resolve what they were still holding on to, right? And there's absolutely still a role for therapy in various circumstances. But what I also came to realize is there were a lot of situations where it actually wasn't helping the person to continue going over the past, right? It's like, understand where you came from, how you got here, and how it's impacted you. But then there's this other part that actually moves you forward, which is creating an understanding of who you desire to be, right? How you desire life to look, what your circumstances are, what you desire them to be. So when we're stuck on reviewing the past and when we're in the present making decisions, right? Some of these women were having to, well, all the women in this movie last night were going through this process of deciding, do I talk about what happened to me, right? Do I share it publicly? And what is the benefit for me to do that? And so as they were going through all of that, the couple of women towards the end that decided, yes, I do want to share, I do want to talk about it. There's this shift from living in the past, right? And not that you have to talk about things publicly at all. This was a very specific circumstances where this was a benefit. But it's like you shift from reviewing the past or holding on to the past or keeping it secret, and you shift into, I don't want that to dictate my life anymore. I'm choosing to release it. And I'm choosing to now look at, how do I want my future to be? How do I want my present circumstances to be? Such that I could create something new for myself. Okay, so then there's this work of how to coming to an understanding of who you're meant to be, who you were without all of these circumstances piled on top of you, right? I refer to it as the truth of who you are underneath all of the crap that gets piled on top of us, these life experiences that get piled on top of us that literally change who you were, right, at birth. So when we're desiring change, when we're desiring more love, when we're desiring greater purpose and meaning in our lives, or we're desiring to have more money coming in so that we can do more amazing things with our lives, we have to really understand, why are we not able to create that right now if we want to be able to actually create it, right? So we look at the beliefs that we've been living on. And I think for this woman, it's such a great example, right? She had been defining herself from this circumstance, from this horrible experience, right? And she formed all kinds of beliefs about who she was as a woman, right? Who the people were that were involved, right? So how her beliefs about men, her beliefs about others, she went and she told people this horrible thing happened to me. And what happened? This whole system basically denied that it happened, right? Or denied that it was important, and like put her to the side and said, oh no, that's not really important. That didn't really happen, or that's not really something we need to be upset over, right? All of these things, all of these feedback, these responses that led her to believe, oh, the thing where I feel so violated and hurt is not important, right? So then she comes to believe like the things that mean the most to me, the things where I feel hurt aren't important. And so then she starts to create this pattern of belief within herself that she doesn't have a voice, that her voice is not important, that her voice is not heard by others, right? And so then she just starts to become small, and she stops talking as much. She stops sharing as much. That particular woman actually stopped being in the film industry altogether, completely sacrificed her future in film, the thing that she had so wanted to be doing. That's amazing when you really stop and think about how our circumstances dictate our lives. Okay, getting riled up here. I'm gonna bring it back home here, and I'll share more on this topic this week because I have a lot to say. So to be able to understand who you are meant to be without all of these experiences that have led us to be who we don't want to be, we have to actually stop believing the story that propels what we do not want in our lives, right? And so that was part of her thought process in deciding to go public with her story, is that she had 3 girls and she wanted to be so clear for them this was not okay. And while I wasn't heard 20, 30 years ago, and I didn't know what to do at that time, and the world around her didn't know how to handle the information and what happened, she wants to be sure that now, here in the present, her 3 children, her 3 girls know for sure that they have a voice, that they have a way of preventing that situation from ever even happening to them, right? And so she's literally changing the story of what is okay, what it is to be a woman for her future children. So you stop believing that story. My voice isn't important. What I have to say isn't important. People won't believe me when I tell them I'm hurting, right? All of these things. I'm not powerful enough to do something about this situation. You stop believing that story. And you start believing the story that you want to be true, that you know deep inside of you actually is true, which is, I am important. What I have to say is important, right? Myself as a woman, I do have a voice. I am meant to be heard. And when I get hurt, right, or when my body is violated, I have recourse. I have action that I can take to protect myself. I'll just keep it in that short verbiage. So you start believing the story that you want to be true, which is, I am powerful. My voice is powerful, right? And so this woman ends up going public with her story, and she is able to tell a new story, both for herself and for her children coming after her. So I'll leave you with this, right? You literally have to stop retelling any and all of the stories that are actually not true for you, right? Regardless of what you've been told, what you've seen, what you've heard, whether it's just from culture, whether it's from the media, whether it's from your religious organization, whether it's from your own parents, your trusted friends, like whoever is telling the story for you that you actually look at and you're like, yeah, no, I don't buy that. I don't really believe that in my heart. That's not my truth. You actually have to literally stop telling yourself that story. Like, let them have their story. Sure, no problem, that's your story. But you stop telling it for you, right? So just keeping in with this theme, it's like you just literally stop repeating, women aren't powerful, or any of the other stories that you have been told or taught or find yourself thinking or believing, even in part, right? And you instead start telling the story that you know is true inside of your heart about yourself and about the way you want to be in the world. Regardless of what you see out here, you decide to stop telling the story that isn't your truth, and you start living inside of the story that is true for you. And I love just using this part for this example that I've been using this morning, is that women are powerful, that you are powerful, right? And that you have a voice. And this story certainly doesn't only affect women, it also affects men, because there was a whole, web of men that were keeping this story alive, that were keeping the behaviors within this system going, right? And so you, even as the man, get to also stop telling that story, right? That's just the way men are. Bullshit. No, that is not the way that men are. And it is darn well not the way that men were created to be, right? No, absolutely not. And so the more you tell that story, that's just how men are, you're being complicit. All of us that say, oh, that's just the way men are, we're being complicit in keeping that story alive. So to see your own personal responsibility, anytime you're being complicit, you're agreeing with, you're retelling the story of what is not true, you're actually being complicit in keeping it true and keeping those circumstances happening in our world, which is why it gets so confusing. And you see like women actually saying things against other women who've been in these horrible situations. And you hear men saying, oh, well, women, those women, they were just asking for it, right? The reason you hear all of that is because we're not being, each individual person, as they're experiencing the circumstances, aren't finding their own truth. They're just repeating the story of other people. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that. Obviously, there's 1,000 things I could continue to say, and more I will say this week. But I'm going to leave you with, stop telling the story that isn't actually truth for you, regardless of what you see outside of yourself. Start telling the story that is true for you, the one that you desire to have happening for you in your life. You're literally going to be redefining who you are and how you show up in the world. And as you go through this process, you will find yourself redefining both who you are as a person, but then also you'll see yourself starting, you will be moved into this position of redefining who you are and what your roles are, how you show up in the role of woman, or the role of wife, or the role of a man, right? You will literally be redefining what that means, which is the creation. It is how we create our circumstances. It's how we create the world we desire to be living in. And it is also, just to note, how one person can and does make such a big difference. All right, you guys, for those of you that watched this whole thing, thank you. I trust it was valuable and helpful, and I would offer to you to begin to use it in your own life today. Look for the stories that you are continuing to allow to live in your mind that are really not truth for you, right? And maybe it's been hard to let go because, your spouse or your parents or your religious institution or, around you believes it. And so you've just gone along with it. But I want to encourage you today to look for those stories and decide those are no longer true for me. And then start this process of figuring out what is true for you. And start to create that in your mind, and then start to live into it in your life. All right, you guys, as always, thanks for joining me here. If you have questions, please reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. Send me a private message through Facebook here. For those of you that are closer connected, feel free to reach out over text. And if you're interested in doing this work of creating a life that you love and feel empowered to live in, and you want some help with that, reach out to me. I would love to help you. First step is just having a conversation about what that would look like. All right, you guys, in the meantime, from when I see you next, go and do that thing you most want to be doing. And I'll talk to you soon.